Shredding the inky black vastness of the void with twin gouts of red-hot superheated iron rain. We are the Lost Warhounds of Vengeance, 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio. Coming to you live tonight from Frank's Ruckatruck, home of the best rat meat chimichangas in the Hive.
Speaking of tenderized rat meat, some Vat Rat Catchers rivalry with the Zerkers kicked it up a notch this week, with the Rat Catchers captain and trapper, Squeak Swiftfoot, dropping 2 decks to take out the Zerker brawler Zane Irongut for the final score of last night's game. Irongut suffered 2 broken shins, and rumor has it he's already plotting his revenge from the Medicaid.
Shit. Iron-Gut's favorite to climb the kill leaderboards this season. My boy better get back in the game fast.
Continuing to be exactly that thing your mama warned you about, I am your neon-crested axe aficionado Goblin King. Joined today by my co-host, whose wit is only outshined by his over-reliance on massed firepower, Marky.
Hello, motherfucker.
Hey, people.
Proving that not everything you find in the other hive will outright kill you, at least quickly. It's the polar bear of the Frost Hollow, Chuckerfly.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Brah?
Brah.
Or brah?
Bruh.
Brah. What's up, brah?
Keeping us well stocked on the sugary libations of liquid teeth, it's our very own hotshot with a crack shot, Kev.
These nuts.
Marky, I was trying to throw a word into yours that you wouldn't understand, so you'd be like, "What?"
Say again.
But then I stopped. I was like, "Nah, I can't hit Marky with a 10-cent word every week.
Yeah, please don't.
I gotta save those for every month."
Did you guys hear that there's an owl pretending to be one of us?
Who?
I think it's you.
Why did I do that? I knew what was going on, and I still did it. That's like when you know the D's nuts thing is coming, but you're still like,
I'm gonna say it.
Fine.
I was just surprised it was you. I thought it was going to be Marky. I really thought it was going to be Marky.
I think he knew. He had this premonition not to say anything.
Nah.
Nah, you just beat him to it.
Welcome to episode 76 of Under the Hive of Madness, the Great Crusade Part 1. We will be covering an overall summary of the Crusade before getting into some of the nitty-gritty details, exploring a lot of the 42nd Millennium lore that has its roots back in these earliest years of the Imperium of Man. So far this season, we have been pretty deep in all of 30K's lore, focusing a lot on the fundamental elements of the faction of humanity, which basically makes up about half of the playable armies. Our current roadmap is laid out to take us through the events of the Horus heresy before we take on our next faction series. Don't worry, though, as we move on towards summer, some of those Xenos heresy bits that you guys love are there on the horizon. However, before we jump into the meat of the episode, do you guys have any favorite part or factoid about the Great Crusade you want to share?
Yeah, it was led by the Emperor.
Very good, Marky. Very good.
Yes, very astute. I did not know that. I'm so glad you were here to tell me.
Learning something new every day.
Yep. That's what I'm here for.
Dropping the knowledge.
The factoids.
Use precious. I swear.
use precious. How about you, Chuck? You
Well, that's just what we call pillow talk, baby.
You got anything about the Great Crusade that stands out as like your favorite bit or a fact that you're, I don't know, really into or obsessed with?
Well, I mean, just it's proven time and time again who the loyalists are, and there's a bunch of spoiled babies out there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who sucked at the Crusade, and then, obviously they're the ones who then turn traitor.
I'm trying not to turn this into an 8-part series where I get into why every single Space Marine Legion is kind of a little bitch.
I'm not talking about all of them.
We're not talking about all of them. We're just talking about the fact that the bitchiest ones were the ones who turned traitor.
I know who you're talking about.
And everybody needs to remember, too, the ones that turned traitor were the second choices of the Chaos Gods.
That is not true. And if you had been here for our Emperors and his Primarch project episodes, We actually addressed that, Chuck.
Well,
I mean,
real life had to get in the way. I'm sorry.
In its own way, chaos didn't really give a shit because chaos is chaos.
No, they randomly picked. They randomly picked things flying through and touched them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Roll the die,
chaos.
baby.
Maybe this one, maybe this one, maybe this one.
Because wasn't it mostly just like, slow recap? It just like they were being scattered.
Yep.
And they were like, it was just kind of, it was random. It was just those were the ones that they hit, and they just deflected those to shittier places.
The theory is that they all passed through the taint of chaos, and chaos touched the minds of the ones that they wanted to corrupt as they went through it.
They passed through what?
The taint.
Oh.
Man, you're
what did you think I
0
said?
for 2 there.
Wow.
The gooch of chaos.
Got the gooch.
Gooch and Nurgle.
Kev, what about you? You got a favorite factoid or a little tidbit?
I really like that it was against a bunch of things that we don't see anymore.
Yeah.
Like
they got officially
people
wiped
think
the fuck
that it's
out.
like when they're first learning about Warhammer, they're just like, oh, so it's been going on since then, and it's the same aliens. Like, no. This is against a whole bunch of other aliens.
The big boys are still around, though. The orcs and the Eldari are still around.
Right. Yeah. And the Necron were asleep, and things like that. So
yeah.
There's a reason, there's a good reason, and there's lore behind why they didn't get fought then and why they're around now, or, why they lived through that. But also the fact that a lot of the Great Crusade was to regain what humanity had lost.
Yeah. Yep.
It wasn't just fuck everybody. It was, this was my dirt and I want it back.
This was my dirt and I want it back.
Yeah. In the end, it's always about who has the most dirt.
So probably my favorite character, oddly enough, is Loken, who is a loyalist Luna Wolf.
Yep.
And the subject of quite a few of the Horus Heresy books. And I probably like him quite a bit because you spend a lot of time in his head, and he has some traits that I feel I identify with. As boring of a character as Space Marines can be, he actually has some traits I identify with. But obviously being the chaos player in the group, my allegiance lies pretty heavily with Abaddon and the Black Legion most of the time. Oh yeah.
What is this, the episode of Soundboard?
That's what he does. This is
I'll
what
slow
Marky
it down.
does now. Marky got his soundboard back, and he's just having fun.
It's back. That's the problem. Is it was gone for a while.
I'm just waiting for the listeners to yell at me like, dude, fucking stop.
I'm pretty much getting there
when you
before
do
them.
It'll be when you do it in the middle of like a specifically written horror short that I'll be like, Marky, not enough. Don't
Like,
badum
wrong
tis
mood.
because somebody had their guts ripped out of their mouth, dude. It's wrong time. Read the room.
I mean, it might be the right time.
It depends. It depends on who's doing it. If Nurgle's doing it, it's probably a badum tis. It happens.
What's that? Their guts were getting smashed?
Yep.
All right, I'm good.
Mm-hmm. Guts
Are
getting
you?
smashed.
Oh,
by,
I like it.
I know you're not.
5 Space Marines and a Sororitas.
Oh wow. Oh wow. That's a hell of a couch to be sitting on.
Joke's on you. It's a Dark Eldar arena. You are the couch.
Yeah, it makes sense. Von Kai, if you don't want to be tortured, why do you have a nervous system?
So the Crusade.
It was at this moment that Nathan knew. He fucked up.
So the Great Crusade started in 798.M30 and was a roughly 200 standard year Terran conflict in the early history of the Imperium of Man. This conflict sought to reunify the entirety of the human settled space and planets under the rule of the Emperor of Mankind. So kind of as Kevin mentioned, we spread during the Golden Age, or humanity spread during the Golden Age of technology. They were in all these disparate places, and the Emperor wanted to go back and get everybody back into the fold. Right on the heels of the Age of Strife, which consumed mankind for 5,000 years, this brief period of human history shined incredibly brightly, the Crusade itself. with the reunification, rebuilding, and even rapid technological advancement, the Great Crusade is often considered the golden age of the Imperium itself. The Emperor still lived in the traditional sense and led his forces in person. His goal in uniting humanity's scattered colonies under one banner, ending the strife and interhuman struggles which consumed mankind for aeons. Once this was achieved, his intention shifted toward human domination of the entire Milky Way galaxy.
I thought the golden age was when, was before the age of strife.
Yeah, this is the golden age of the Imperium, not the golden age of technology, which is known to the Imperium as the dark age of technology.
That's the one that had a couple names, right? Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And that's why. So non-Imperium focused scholars refer to it as the golden age of technology because that's when we made the most technologically that's when we made our most advances, and that's when we spread to the stars. The Imperium refers to it as the dark age of technology because it led to AI, and then the fall, they believe, kind of
led to the age of strife,
the rise of the age of strife.
Gotcha.
If the Emperor was successful in dominating the entire Milky Way galaxy, it would give humanity the best chance against chaos, the myriad of Xenos races, and its own fragile internal human nature. To carry out his Great Crusade, the Emperor created the Space Marine Legions, which would later form the core of the Adeptus Astartes, and the Imperial Army, which would serve as a support and garrison force for the Astartes forces as they moved outward. Created with the use of accelerated genetics in the creation of gene seed organs, vast numbers of Space Marines could be reproduced in a short time, a factor that led to the later development of genetic flaws across many of the legions. Flaws which would become factors in the brewing storm of the great betrayal known as the Horus Heresy.
I know one thing that's really cool in some of the novels about the technology part of it. It's one of the Dark Angel novels. And you know how in 40k now everything's all about, I get an arm blown off, it's replaced with metal.
Yep.
One of the Dark Angel novels, it's like the Emperor shows up, finds the lion, does all this stuff, has the Citadel going, and there's an actual thing talking about how here's this, teenage boy who normally going up in the knighthood, doing live combat training, gets his arm cut off. And normally it'd be like, now he's a burden on his family, he's forced out of the Citadel and the whole thing. There's the Medicaid there, injecting him with something, and his arm grows back.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
There are all sorts of crazy technology that existed during the Great Crusade that 1,000 years after the Great Crusade kind of went away. We'll actually talk as we get through the Horus Heresy and probably circle back to post-Horus Heresy technology as we march forward towards the Age of Apostasy and some of the other eras of Imperial history. There's actually another period of kind of technological growth. Essentially, the Emperor dies, and that makes everybody pessimistic and sad. But it takes a couple of 100 years to 1,000 years for that to really sink into society and for society to stagnate. There is a short period of time between everything where everything seems to actually be going pretty well again. So we'll come back to Marky will have this again. Will we be like, wait, wasn't the Golden Age? Can they stop naming things the Golden Age, please?
All right. The Golden Age of Gooch.
The taint. The
Yes.
golden taint.
Things that are golden usually cost extra.
It's next to the Golden Throne. That's what sits on the Golden Throne.
It's the golden
Wow.
taint.
It's the Golden Taint.
I mean, is it really gold if it's been sitting there for 10,000 years?
Patinaed. It's the patinaed taint.
It's a little patina. If you like patina coladas.
Oh my god. So these forces couldn't bring the light of the Imperium to the scattered remnants of humanity alone, and with the Treaty of Mars, the Mechanicum's technological and military aid was secured. At its peak in the early years of the 31st millennium, roughly 203 standard years after it began, there were 4,287 primary expedition fleets in active duty, along with another 60,000 secondary deployment groups, all focused on bringing the far-ranging threads of humanity back into the Imperial compliance. There were an additional 372 expedition fleets that were either regrouping or refitting in Sol system or other Imperial hub star systems. Spread among these fleets were 4.3 million remembrancers, artists, writers, musicians, photographers, and other artisans who had been sent out during the final stretch of the Great Crusade to witness and record the majesty of the Imperium's efforts for all time. Each Imperial expedition fleet also contained a corps of iterators. These philosophers, rhetoricians, and propagandists sought to spread the Imperial truth to every human world, convincing those long lost and cut off from the homeworld of humanity to rejoice and welcome the benefits of the Emperor and Imperial rule.
I feel like it's like that guy in Starship Troopers with the camera. It's like getting all the action.
That's 100%
the witness
how
glory.
remembrances are.
I mean, it's that, and then whenever they found human societies, like, diplomacy time.
Yeah. Well,
right.
By showing them those dope movies of like, look at what we did to get here.
Do you really want to try
me? Please comply.
Try me.
Do you want to know more?
Do you want to know more?
I mean,
because you can find out the easy way or the hard way.
Well, yeah, like remembrancers were anything from somebody who drew a sketch of the battle to somebody who might carve a statue of Sanguinius or something like that. And iterators were what you guys are talking about. Iterators were more on the propaganda side. They were the guys that defined and spread the word of the Imperial truth.
They were usually after, in the novels I've read, those guys usually came along after the world was forcefully conquered.
Yeah.
If the governing body of that galaxy or whatever they were in were like, you know what, we're down for this, we miss humanity, we're all good. Those guys didn't show up. It's when it was like, oh, now you got to rebuild your society because you don't believe in the Emperor and mankind.
It's too bad.
Too bad. This is why you have to.
Sometimes, depending on who got there first, and we'll talk about who normally got there first in this episode, but sometimes, depending on who got there first, it would actually be iterators that made the initial, like, because they're the diplomacy guys. They're the guys that are like, hey, brothers. Hey, brothers, do you want to come in out of the cold, brother? And then
let me tell you about the Emperor, brother.
Yeah, let me tell you about the Emperor, brother.
And his warm lights.
But if they failed, if the original conversation between the iterators, if the initial conversation between the iterators and that whatever force or whatever nation that they were talking to went sideways, usually the next option was the nuclear option. When you're a space marine, everything's a nail and you're a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
So
pretty much.
Until the Imperial victory against the massive Orc Wa during the Olinar Crusade, the Great Crusade had been under the personal command of the Emperor of Mankind himself. However, this defeat of the Orcs marked a high point in the achievement of the Crusade. It was at this point that the Emperor chose to retire to Terra to begin work on a secret project deep within the Imperial Palace. This project was meant to open humanity's access to the Eldari webway, allowing the Imperium to be tied together much more efficiently, while also shielding it from the horrors of the warp by eliminating much of the need for warp travel. It wouldn't have gotten rid of it altogether because there's obviously, if you're going to explore past the edges, or if you don't know where the warp gate goes, you're still going to have to use the webway portal goes, you're still going to have to use the warp, but it would have gotten rid of like 75% of the use of the warp essentially. To continue in his stead, the Emperor named Horus, Primarch of the Luna Wolves Space Marine Legion, as War Master of the Imperium, a title which gave Horus full authority to direct and execute the Great Crusade's progression, even over the other Primarchs, because until he was seduced by being killed and resurrected, Horus was better than Dorn. Fuck you, Chuck.
Wow. Wow.
Fatality.
I'm just fucking around, dude.
No, I know.
The Emperor also established the Council of Terra and the Imperial Bureaucracy. That's the word I can't pronounce without sounding drunk. The Imperial Bureaucracy. These institutions that would later become the Senatorium Imperialis of the High Lords of Terra and the Adeptus Administratum. These institutions were founded so the Emperor could shift rule from his direct command to a government which served at his direction, but toward the common people's needs.
Yeah, and the whole thing with Horus too, like everyone that's read the novels or those that haven't, it was actually a tough decision for who he picked.
Yeah,
It
a
was
tough
it was
decision.
actually between the top two were Sanguinius and Horus.
And the whole reason that I teased Chuck like that was
Oh, I
because
know.
there are parts in the book where people are like, "Oh, Dorn, they should have picked you," and he's like, "I don't care who they picked. Like, that's our boss. Shut up."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. When if you look into the personality traits of all the Primarchs before they turned, not everybody got along with Dorn. Not everybody got along with Gilman. Not everybody got along with certain ones. But it's like
Can't imagine why.
Horus and Sanguinius were the ones like everybody got
Everybody
along
liked
with and
him.
loved. Yeah.
That's a sexy motherfucker. That's why. Sanguinius, not Horus.
Yeah.
Horus was good looking, though, wasn't he?
I mean, he was
Horus
big,
was
bald
bald.
guy.
And Sanguinius
So-
had the most luxurious flowing hair. So really,
Yes.
it's anybody
no?
in between.
And wings.
And wings. So anybody in between just isn't cool enough. You either have to be like a bald hard ass or a majestic hawk boy.
Or Sephiroth.
Yeah. Basically Sephiroth or The Rock.
Or The Rock, yeah. I was gonna say.
Anybody in between doesn't matter.
Vin Diesel. It's
I mean, he's-
Vin Diesel.
He's, what is that, Abaddon?
Abaddon's all about, or not, Horus. Horus is all about family.
Oh God.
Need Tom here, son of a bitch.
I know, right?
Right now, Ryan's trying to find a beautiful picture of Horus, but he's having a little trouble.
Oh no, there's a picture of Horus right here.
For $3, $6, or $9, you can see what we're talking about on our Patreon.
The triumph
Not
of Eleanor is
369,
one.
3, 6, or 9.
That's
Oh,
right.
I don't like this quote. The triumph of Eleanor is one of the pivotal moments of the heresy, the moment where the fuse is lit. Okay, I guess I can see the point they're making. Although technically the heresy does not start with Eleanor,
Nope.
but that's fine. There's Sanguinius. If you needed a picture of Sanguinius. And you'll notice that both Sanguinius and Horus have the Eye of Horus on their armor.
Yeah,
'Cause they
I
were
noticed
pretty good
that.
friends. Because they were very good friends.
Okay. I thought maybe it meant something in the Greater Imperium, and then it was just expunged.
It was Horus's symbol. It was Horus's personal symbol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, to paraphrase the great science fiction author Douglas Adams, then Horus was named War Master. This has made a lot of people very angry and has widely been regarded as a bad move.
Perfect line.
It was at this moment that Nathan knew. He fucked up.
I'm really surprised we don't have that as a soundbite. That specific line
It was
from Hitchhikers.
That was when the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and has widely been regarded as a bad move. One of my favorite lines. The Emperor's secrecy in his projects and his willingness to hand power over to others created an enormous amount of tension and animosity among the Primarchs, leading ultimately to the ruinous powers targeting and exploiting these weaknesses, corrupting 9 of the Space Marine legions into the service of the Dark Powers. This gathering storm broke in a terrible civil war known as the Horus Heresy, a conflict which ended the Great Crusade and the Golden Age of the Imperium. Whether it was hubris of a comparatively young race of mankind, or if the coming treachery was somehow inevitable, the next 10,000 years of human history would be a marked, long, slow slide into cultural stagnation, political repression, and religious fanaticism, which would see the galaxy consumed in the flames of an unending war.
Yeah.
You also need a dun 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 soundboard.
I mean, again,
I'll find it.
It's coming now. Now that I said something, it's coming.
It's coming around the bend.
are you finding it? Are we waiting for it?
Nailed
Very
it.
nice.
What's this?
Perfect, Marky. Perfect.
With the magic of editing, that will seem smoother.
is John C.
That ain't it.
That's not what we need right now. That's more like Is Fun Massacre.
Yeah, no shit, right? Not this episode, next episode. That's actually the moment. Oddly enough, that's actually the moment that a lot of people consider the actual beginning of the heresy.
Oh, when Angron pops out of the bodies and kills that
It
general?
depends on when it's open heresy or
the Istvan
the drop site massacre. Yeah.
That is the last listed battle of the Great Crusade, and it is the first listed battle of the Horus Heresy.
Yeah, because that's when it
I can
switched
see
from
that.
being a setup for a revolution to basically an open revolution.
And we had discussed this we discussed this in our Under the Realms of Madness episode a little bit more detail, but kind of keep in mind that, as Marky put, history runs concurrently. It doesn't run laterally. All of these events are kind of slightly overlapping each other the entire time. In fact, there's a good argument to make that the fucking word bearers are on the heresy path since like the second half of the Great Crusade.
I was about to say since day one.
Yes. No. Well,
when they get bitch slapped for building castles to daddy, and daddy yells at them for building sandcastles.
Yeah, wasn't that like their first planetary takeover?
No, it was like, well, it happened a couple of times. The one that they got really bent about was in about the middle of the Crusade, though.
Yeah, that's
okay. Is that the one where it was like covered in churches?
Yeah.
That's the one where they decided to. Man, I wish I could remember all the names, but when that Primarch decided to listen to his daddy that raised him and start switching everything over to the chaos worship again.
Lorgar.
No. Was it
Erebus?
Lorgar is the Primarch. Erebus is the guy whispering to him.
No, the one that was higher up.
Farfaron.
Farfaron, the one Terminator armor. The one that
the
quotes raised him. Yeah.
The guy that was too old to become a space marine, but they still like fucking made him a space marine with magic.
Oh yeah, that happened to a bunch of the Dark Angel
magic
guys too.
Yeah, we'll talk about quasi marines. There's just a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we'll talk about.
But yeah, like I agree that was that's really the turning point, because that's when Erebus started going down his path to get the what do you call it, the Enanthium.
He turned into Greamer Wormtongue pretty quickly there.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
So as a quick refresher, since we just spent a bunch of time covering the Unification Wars and the Primarch Project, if you'd like a little bit more on those, go back to our last few episodes. But Terra was cut off from the rest of the galaxy for 5,000-year period that has become known as the Age of Strife. To anchor all of these events in the greater sea of lore that we've already talked about, the warp storms that cut off Terra were created by the growth of Slaanesh and the warp. Slaanesh had been growing for 5,000 years and was eventually born due to the hedonism of the Eldari people, and that happened in about M30. With her eventual birth consuming the core of the Eldari Empire, which became the massive warp storm known as the Eye of Terror. With this event, sometime near the 30th millennium, the warp storms across the galaxy calmed, allowing Terra and humanity access to the astropathic communication channels and warp travel once again. Back during that same 5,000-year period on Terra, the Emperor had come out of hiding, starting his genetics programs, which eventually led to the creation of the Space Marine Legions and the Primarchs, and he had unified the techno-barbarian nation-states of Old Earth into the Imperium of Mankind, and had renamed the planet Terra. For a deeper look at all of these events, check out the first several episodes of Season 3 of Under the Hive of Madness.
You mean the Thunder Warriors unified Terra?
The things that made... yes,
the
Marky,
Emperor
I'm sorry.
unified Terra.
Sure.
Marky, when you play chess, is it the pawns that are unifying the board, or is it Marky that's unifying the board?
Touche.
Do you now understand how the Emperor felt about the Thunder Warriors? I completely understand you, and I refuse to acknowledge.
This is where like the gears in Marky's head slowly start turning, and the camera zooms in slowly, and you just see the hammer and sickle slowly start to form. He's like,
that started happening episode 1 of the Unification War. That was episode 1 of season 3.
Well, now he really gets it. Now he's like, wait, pawns? You mean like the lowly people? They weren't pawns? No, everybody's good here.
I refuse your reality and I accept my own.
And I substitute my own, right?
Yeah.
That's from, what is that? That's that Mythbusters?
Something like that. Yeah. I heard it from somewhere.
Good, man.
It's a thing. People say it.
You keep believing in your reality. It's all good.
Emperor was a dick.
Just remember, there's still
he was a dude doing what he had to do.
He's a dude playing a dude.
Disguised as
Like
another
that.
dude.
Married to a dude. Wait, what?
I mean, that we don't know that.
Could have happened. Probably happened at
happened.
least once. He did live a lot of lives.
He did. He was a perpetual.
Right. So Mars and the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Emperor's first steps in the reunification of humanity actually happened sometime before the end of the actual unification wars. The Mechanicum, an empire of tech priests of the cult Mechanicus on Mars, have been historically independent and relatively violently so from old Earth. Instead of risking an outright war of conquest, the Emperor used the subtle threat of invasion by his Space Marine legions and the offer of new technologies to bring an alliance with the Mechanicum to bear in the 30th millennium. This alliance formed the heart of the newly forming Imperium of Man and is symbolized by the adoption of the two-headed eagle, also known as the Aquila, which is still the primary iconography of the Imperium in the 42nd millennium. And if I remember correctly, the eagle with the eye represents the Emperor, and the eagle without an eye, the blind eagle, represents Mars. And there's a reason for that. And when we get into the Aquila and some of the other iconography, we'll go over it in detail. The Emperor, who had a disdain for their religious structures and their use of cybernetic augmentations, knew that he would still need Mars's great manufactorias if he were to execute the Great Crusade. Their mechanical output and their ancient technological knowledge to build the military forces would be key if he was to reunify the galaxy. The tech priests of Mars saw the Emperor's extraordinary scientific knowledge and the technological skill that he possessed as proof that he was the Omnissiah, the living avatar of the machine god in the material realm, who had been prophesied to return one day to the Red Planet and offer a true path forward for all of humanity. Despite the differences, however, the Treaty of Mars was in fact born and sealed.
I always really liked the particular machine heal thyself part of
when he
him
healed
becoming the whole
knight's
when the one of the first Imperial Knights. Well, it wasn't an Imperial Knight; it was a Knight of Tyrannus,
Right.
the precursor to the House Tyrannus Imperial Knights. When the Emperor showed up, and that was the first thing he did on Mars. He just walked up and he touched the thing, and he's just like, "Bam! Machine heal thyself."
And it's unclear.
There's the proof.
It's unclear as to whether or not that's an allegorical story, as in the Emperor showed up and they didn't know how to fix it, and he knew how to fix it, so he fixed it, or if he literally like psychic magicked it. And that's actually talked about in, is it Mechanicum that they bring up? One of the first Horus Heresy. It's like within the first 5 or 6 Horus Heresy books.
Mechanicum is the one where it happens.
Yeah. Well, they recall it. Well, it happens, but it happens in like recollection. And maybe it isn't in Mechanicum. There's another Mechanicus book in the Horus Heresy where they talk about it and they're like, we're not actually sure if it happened the way everybody says.
That's Titanicus. That's the one where they almost have a civil war in the middle of fighting against Titans. And then they're like, this is a terrible idea. And then somebody edits what it comes down to, spoilers if you haven't read it, is one of the tech priests edits it to make it more in favor of the separatists, which, because it's no longer authentic, undermines the whole everything that it stood on. So
there's a lot of stuff with the Emperor and what the Emperor does on and around Mars, including the Void Dragon and some other stuff, that's very much presented a little bit more as allegory than actual history.
Oh yeah.
It's presented as these like pseudo legendary stories, which again is one of the things that the Emperor's propaganda machine was like fucking perfect at doing. They loved doing that shit because it builds the legend and it builds the fanatical. Even if you're not supposed to be religious, it still builds that fanatical like cult of personality worship.
It gives you the reason to be like, you know what? He's right. I do want to follow him.
Right. Like,
you know, looking at me when you say that.
Because you're forming a cult of personality.
Because you're still talking about a broken tool.
Oh my God. There's like a 3-way war going on right now. Marky's all embittered about Thunder Warriors. I'm all embittered about the Luna Wolves, and Chuck's all pro Emperor and Imperial Fists.
I mean,
and Kev's just over there like, I shoot what people tell me to shoot.
Whatever they pay me to shoot. No, whatever they pay me to shoot.
That's right.
when you're on the right side of 40k here,
I work that way as well.
Whoa.
I do both sides. I do the not shooting for money as well.
Oh, if I offer you enough money, you won't shoot?
Yeah,
Perfect.
that
Good to
also
know.
happens.
In conquest of an entire galaxy.
A plasma salesman. There we go.
Plasma salesman.
Yeah, I will trade my perfectly good plasma for your money.
And you don't mean your blood plasma. You mean like the plasma
weaponized plasma.
Violently flies across. Yeah. Dude, is that a thing out there? That's a thing here. Like because like podcast ads and stuff are regional, I'll get ads to like donate plasma. And I'm like, I'm not going to go do that. Sorry. I don't want somebody shoving bones into my marrow. Wait.
I get I don't get plasma ones. I get sperm bank ones.
Maybe it's the websites you go to. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I think it's regional. I think it's regional. Because you're in that one county that's known for.
I'm in Orange County, so there's probably a lot here.
Yeah, out yourself, dox yourself. Orange County is only so big, man. No,
it's quite large,
and it could be in Florida too. Never mind.
That too,
or New Jersey, because there's an Orange County in New Jersey as well.
Yeah, and how about this? I learned through my traveling that the state of Utah has less people than 10% of LA.
Holy shit. I mean, I'm not really surprised, but holy shit. Like Montana.
like LA itself has more people than the entirety of multiple states put together.
This is not true anymore. But Montana at one point, since I became capable of driving, since I got my driver's license. So Chuck, this is within your lifetime as a driver too. Didn't have a speed limit because the population was so low it didn't require one.
Yeah, I remember that.
That
went away in like 2007 or 2008.
Oh, bastards. I always wanted to go there and drive as fast as possible.
Nah, it's gone. You can't do it anymore.
I think there's
it's still like 80 or 90, but you're good.
And they were also super cheeky about it. They're like, yeah, there's no speed limit. Just don't hit a cow because you'll die. So you're like, oh. I'm still going to drive normal because I don't want to hit a 400-pound or a 1,400-pound thing that's going to outright murder me.
Oh, yeah. No, I would want to do it like on a motorcycle where like if a cow was in the middle of the road, you'd have at least some chance of doing something about it.
I like how he said some chance.
It's not guaranteed.
A greater chance of becoming pavement paste, but...
No, well, think about it this way. You're dead either way. You hit it with a car at 120 miles an hour, you're dead. Doesn't matter. You're fucked.
That's true.
You hit it on a bike, you're also fucked. Now, the bike, you could like do a little shoulder run, you know?
I see that. Now,
you do that in
here's
the car,
a weird thing.
And the traction differential is going to cause you to spin out at that speed.
We're one of the states that doesn't have a helmet law. Like, you don't have to wear a helmet on a bike, which I think is stupid, but...
I agree that is dumb as a person who rides motorcycles in a semi-hooligan manner. Then again, I also just recently witnessed a no helmet law in a national park where the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. And I was like, all right, this part makes sense. Like if you're literally on a one-lane road that's just cruising at 25 miles an hour through a national park and it's not bad weather, I could see going without a helmet as long as you had boots and gloves and stuff to catch yourself.
But here's the thing. The guys who don't wear helmets, and there was one behind me today when I was driving,
are the guys going 95 splitting lanes on a fucking bagger.
He was in cargo shorts, wearing sandals, and he had a short sleeve shirt, button-up short sleeve shirt on that was unbuttoned like 4 buttons. I'm like, bruh, are you trying to get hit by a slightly above average sized bug and have it cut your arm off?
Actually,
because like that's what's gonna happen.
Those
or
exact
put your
words,
foot down too fast, and then your fucking sandals gone. Like, come on, bro.
There was a Kawasaki ad it was pro helmet a long time ago, and it was that exact like phrase that you said is what triggered the memory of it for me. It was on one side of the ad, it was a Japanese green like beetle thing, the emerald beetles.
Yeah.
And then as it got closer to the other side of the page, or it was, like a magazine ad or a billboard ad, it turned into a bullet. And then it had at the bottom, and it was 0 miles an hour, 0 to 5 miles an hour. And then it was like, 80 to 100 miles an hour. And it was like, your choice. Wear a helmet.
Oh shit, man.
So speaking of turning humanoids into a hamburger meat.
As you do.
Daka.
So Tell me more about this conquest.
Oh, you wanted me to continue. I thought,
right,
we were on it. We had
a thing we were talking about.
Story.
I forgot we were talking about a something.
In the conquest of an entire galaxy, regardless of how mighty and valiant the war host of the Emperor was, the Great Crusade would prove the largest and most ambitious military endeavor ever taken by mankind, requiring the use of countless thousands of warp-capable space vessels, capable of transporting the hundreds of thousands of superhuman space marine legionnaires and billions of Imperial army soldiers to various points in the stars. Further out in the Sol system lay the Polites of Saturn, which had formed during the Age of Strife. This disparate league of independent domains and kingdoms formed from the numerous asteroid enclaves, orbital arcologies, and lunar colonies which existed about the gas giant. While this was an uneasy and often fractious existence, over time they formed into a technologically advanced and void-specialized culture, more than willing to quickly set aside internal conflicts when it came to repelling outside threats such as mutant or Xenos raiders or the baleful influence of Mars, any that came and sought to raid their wealth and resources. This combined military was by far the most powerful fleet in Sol system. Their combined military was by far the most powerful fleet in Sol system prior to their voluntary unification with the Imperium. As soon as they joined the Imperium, that became the biggest fleet. Their elite armed forces, known as the Saturnian Ordo, had honed weapons and tactics of void warfare for centuries, being second only to the Legiones Astartes in skill and effectiveness. So these dudes were badass enough that it took Astartes to impress them. They weren't impressed with anything else. They saw a couple of space marines and they're like, all right, we can hang. Many haven't
I
even
can respect that.
I can hang. Many haven't even argued that it was the Polites of Saturn voluntarily joining the Imperium that was the true beginning of the Great Crusade. The first 10 regiments raised in the legendary Solar Auxilia were known collectively as the Saturnian Rams, and were basically the void hoplites of the Saturnian Order, just reorganized and expanded. However, they kept their arms and armor unchanged, and they were sent alongside those early Terran-born Space Marine legions to help in the earliest conquests of the galaxy. So there's a little bit more to that. The Saturnian Ordo was actually fighting off and kind of under the heels of a Xenos tyrant at the time that the Imperium showed up. And they were basically kind of winning, or it's implied that they were kind of winning because there's not a lot of written lore about this. It's just kind of like little rumors and little hints and little asides.
Tidbits.
And
Yeah,
and the Space Marine Legions basically helped. The Space Marine Legions made it so that instead of taking several months for them to win against the Suppressor, they won in a couple of days. And at that point, the Polites of Saturn were like, "What up, dog?" And then they heard the Emperor's, they heard the Emperor's goal to spread out to the stars and reunite all of the like little chunks of humanity, and they're like, "We're down for this," and they basically just threw in. There was no fight. There was no big diplomacy. And at that point, the Emperor had, and I'm throwing out numbers. None of these are official, but the Emperor had like 10 ships and the Polites of Saturn had like 20,000 ships. So if it had come to a void to void conflict, the Imperium would not have won.
Yeah.
The Imperium would have lost. For all the power of the Astartes and all the power of the Imperial Guard and all the other stuff that we talk about, we also focus on the tabletop side of the game, and the tabletop side of the game is played with armies, and that's what a lot of the faction lore is based on. But when you get into the deeper lore and the Black Library lore, a lot of these conflicts are determined by the Navy without the planet even knowing something happened.
Yep,
absolutely.
Like it's fast.
It's actually, it's been debated that once you reach a point of like galactic empire scale, if armies even truly matter, when you can just blockade a planet or bombard it from orbit.
Right. Exactly.
Like short of, oh, I don't want to harm the infrastructure. Like there really isn't a reason to invade a planet.
We've talked about it on the podcast in the past, and it's definitely something that gets brought up a lot. One of the interesting things about like why are there melee combat weapons in sci-fi settings is you don't want to shoot heavy armor penetrating guns inside of a ship that's in space.
Inside a space vessel.
Yeah,
that's a dumb idea.
There's a reason Imperial boarding parties use monofilament shotguns. It's because it'll paste whatever it hits, but it won't go through a bulkhead.
Right. You're going to use scatter guns, you're going to use shotguns, and you're going to use fucking hand weapons. Because that's the way to deal with the problem.
Or really low caliber chemical based.
You see that photo, Marky?
What is that photo exactly?
That is a painting of a false empire.
It looks like Sanguinius and Gilliman.
That's Gilliman holding up Sanguinius's hand.
Yeah, a false empire. Ultramarines making their own empire when the heresy was going on.
So Ryan, you're saying, well, I guess Kevin,
false, but anyways, that comes later.
If aliens decided to visit Earth and they didn't like us, they probably wouldn't show up on Earth. They'd probably just blow it to shit, right?
Honestly, at the level of technology we're at now, they probably wouldn't even consider us a threat and would just observe, and that's it. We wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
We're either the bleeding edge of technological advancement, and that's why we're not seeing anything. There's like 3 options.
Yeah, we're the best, and nobody can catch up to us, and we're never going to find them because we're so far ahead, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Or we're all neck and neck. We're all roughly at the same level of advancement at the same time.
Because the universe started at the same time, blah, blah, blah. Like there's a daisy chain of reasoning behind all of these.
Right.
Or we've already been found and we're essentially in a protected part of the galaxy. They've basically said,
this is like
there's
a nature
an evolving
reserve.
race here. They need to get to a certain point before we contact them. Let them exist on their own.
So it's kind of like
other possibility, the scary possibility is that the galaxy's fucking empty.
There's also one more, which is there is something more advanced than us, and it just hasn't got here yet.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously variations on all of that stuff.
Yeah, like Men in Black, where they have like the galaxies and all those little marbles, and we're just being observed by some greater being the size of, Galactus.
Right.
Playing marbles with our little universe, pocket universe.
Right, because we can only see so far into the universe, so it's kind of like we're in a marble bag of galaxies.
Yep.
The other thing that comes
we're
into
in a dark age of technology. We've already been out there and lost.
Yeah.
That's true. Or
reset.
maybe
there's actually a bunch of theories about that as well, actually.
What if all of our history and all of our legend and all of our everything that we believe is actually the real Earth, and this isn't actually Earth?
This is just a simulation of life sucking to see how long until we rebel.
We're waiting for the Emperor to come save us. That's what's happening.
But yeah, no, one of the other things that I've heard is civilizations get to a certain point and then they exterminate themselves, and we just haven't reached that point yet.
Yeah.
One of the other ones that's actually relatively compelling and makes a lot of sense is that we have this tendency to think that our technology is really great at looking at everything at once. We're like, oh yeah, we're pointing in 360 degrees, so why can't we detect some noise coming out? But then if you actually dig into the science, we're looking at like 0.2% of the total of the universe at any minute, because we can't focus on more than like a super small chunk at any minute. So there could be messages coming at us all the time, and we're just not looking in the right direction when they show up. Though it's interesting. Alien stuff is crazy.
Gnarly.
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Based on its ever-increasing needs, the Great Crusade saw a staggering array of space vessels constructed, reclaimed, or pressed into service, some only surviving a scant handful of solar months before being declared obsolete, wearing out, degrading into useless junk, or being claimed and destroyed in active battles. Others found permanent places as warhorses of the Imperium, their successful designs endlessly copied and modified as the long decades progressed into centuries. The first generation of these vessels were born in the orbital foundries of Terra itself, before production moved to Mars's Ring of Iron. It's weird to say Mars's. And later the orbital shipyards of Saturn, always under the watchful eye of the Forge Rights of the Mechanicum, who were themselves under the scrutiny of the Emperor himself. It was only for this original alliance that the transsolar expansion and unification was possible in any meaningful way or meaningful timeline. As the Imperium expanded, the great shipyards at Voss, Grugorod, Lauren, and Cyphermundi were founded, growing near to rivaling Mars itself in void ship production, ever feeding the growing expeditionary fleets that pushed ever outward, driven by the will of the Emperor. These great expeditionary forces were comprised of hundreds, even at times thousands of vessels. So when I mentioned that there were 4,287 of them, that isn't 4,287 ships. That could be 4,287 battle fleets that all comprise 100,000 ships. Lots of ships.
Desalar ships.
Yeah. And proceeding before them were smaller contingents of independent flotillas led by a class of martial leader that would become known as the Rogue Traders Militant.
Hey.
Individuals that had been rulers, individuals who had originally been rulers of the numerous nation states the Emperor conquered during the Unification Wars, and later the independent human worlds that had been secured in the opening decades of the Great Crusade. They had been offered a stark choice: bend the knee before the Emperor, swearing to the service of the Great Crusade, or die immediately by his hand. While many chose their pride over what they felt was slavery, bound to another's creed, many chose service and took the Emperor's offered warrant of trade. This came with the price, however, as the Rogue Traders Militant was expected to scout ahead at the knife edge of the Great Crusade, accompanied by their own armies and whatever other assets had been granted to them by the favor of the Emperor.
So all of the, Saturn people, well, most of the Saturn people became rogue traders?
No. The Saturnine Ordo joined the Emperor willingly without getting into a fight.
And then the flotillas.
It was the noble houses of Earth that he conquered.
Yeah. So if you were conquered, if you lost in conquest and the Emperor threw you in the dungeons for a couple of years, he might come around later and offer you a warrant of trade.
Basically be like, I got a job for you.
Basically made you a privateer.
I'm lost because you mentioned the flotillas and them becoming the rogue traders, or did I misinterpret that?
They needed admirals. And the way to do admiralty, in the Napoleonic style, is to commission your officers with, college, because you don't just pull from the random dudes to be admirals. You need people with education and stuff. So they took the people who understood logistics and everything like that and command, which were the people that he had previously defeated in combat, and were like, all right, are you going to come around, or am I just going to kill you now?
So, yeah, and I think
we're not talking about the people who, the Empire of Saturn.
No.
So I think where
you guys are dope, I'm joining.
Yeah. So I think where you got confused, when they came across the Polites of Saturn, the Polites of Saturn had a massive fleet and were basically like, we like what you're doing, we're joining with you. And at that moment, that's the actual moment that the idea of what we consider to be the Imperium of man was probably born. Because you go from, say 20 ships from Mars, 20 ships from Earth, and then you combine that with 20,000 ships from Saturn, then you have an actual navy.
Yeah.
So then you talk about the rogue traders being formed or them establishing their contracts. You're saying that those were previously conquered individuals that he basically broke a deal with?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you were a techno-barbarian on Earth, there is a chance, albeit small, but there was a chance that you owned your own spaceship. You couldn't really do anything with it except maybe go to the moon and back, but there was a chance that you owned your own spaceship. And those guys, he would be like, you are now, here's a contract to become a privateer, to become a pirate. You need to go out in front of my fleets, which are the combined forces of Earth,
Saturn,
Mars, and Saturn at this point. You need to go out in front of them, and whoever you come across, you need to start the process. You soften them up a little bit, spread the word, get trade, all of that. By the time we get to where you are, you best have moved on and don't ever come back to Earth. You're banished. You are never allowed. I've made you a rogue trader. You're your own class of nobility, but you are never allowed to return to Earth or to Sol System.
Okay.
And then as they conquered, so say they get to Tau Ceti, which is the next theoretical system closest to us, closest to Earth, closest to the solar system. And when they get to Tau Ceti's got 5,000 ships. Well, we roll in with 25,000 ships and the battle's really, really short. Well, then he takes the commanders of Tau Ceti and goes, look, bend allegiance to me and I'll spare you. And for those guys that did that, he goes, great. You guys are fantastic military commanders, but you're a leader of the opposition. And I can't fold you, General so-and-so, into my military. I can fold everybody below you into my military because you've sworn allegiance to me. But you are still a threat. So you get to keep your personal army and your personal ships, but you now need to go out in front of my fleet and soften. And like, so it kind of rolled like that.
Yeah.
So if you were above a certain rank or you were nobility, you were basically given this like
a chance,
death or cake or death option.
Kind of like Suicide Squad in a way.
Yeah. Now in perpetuity, as time goes on into the 42nd millennia, these rogue trader houses are now dynastically passed down. So they're passed down.
Right.
So now the rule of never come back to Earth doesn't exist because it's been years, essentially.
Yeah. The don't come back to Earth is no longer in effect, but the continue doing things pro-Imperium outside of Imperial jurisdiction still applies.
And rogue traders will most definitely get their own episode or set of episodes so we can focus on them. But this is where rogue traders come from. Rogue traders came from the Great Crusade.
And I mean, that's really the essence of it right there. There's just a lot of detail and some notable ones that we can dive into.
Well, rogue traders in the 42nd millennium are different too. I mean, they still basically do the same job, but they do a lot more, and they can be just as Marky, you brought up the fact that it was a little confusing as to where they came from. It can be even more confusing because the administratum also grants rights of trade, and having a writ of trade and having a warrant of trade are two different things. So a merchant house that, moves ice from Arconia to a different planet to trade, they would have a writ of trade, which just says they're allowed to essentially keep their own police force for their ships, and they're allowed to go from point A to point B and trade for thrones or crowns. A warrant of trade means that you can essentially have your own private army. And there are a set of circumstances that rogue traders can't violate, and one of those sets of circumstances is essentially thou shalt not create an empire. But that's the level of power these guys have. They are told you can do whatever the fuck you want, pretty much completely openly, except actively fucking a chaos god. Like a chaos god. You can't actively have sex with the chaos god. You cannot create an empire to rival my own empire. And if you have Xenos on your ship and in your employ,
don't talk about it.
Don't bring them about polite society. That's kind of the rule. There's more to it, but rogue traders can kind of do whatever the fuck they want within a certain range. And the only people who can
say anything
question
about it
a rogue trader
would be the Inquisition.
The Inquisition, and the only force in the galaxy that can technically tell the Inquisition to fuck off are rogue traders.
Okay, so they're almost at like a Space Marine level, right?
Yes.
So they're like
a rogue trader has the power of a Space Marine chapter master.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the guy at the top,
the telling people what to do capacity, and the who gets to tell them what to do.
Yeah, in the 42nd millennium.
They're parallel to one another. If they're willing to listen, they will. If not, they have the power to say fuck off and do their own thing.
Yeah, they're like a commissar. They're in the structure, but they're outside of the structure.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and a lot of times, if there's a splinter or just a hand, to say an entire Space Marine chapter is almost completely wiped out, and the Death Watch is not close enough, or whatever, the Imperium, the High Lords of Terra, can gift those Space Marines to a rogue trader, and then those Space Marines work for the rogue trader. And there's no question. There's not a 111th Ultramarine Crusade force is wiped out except for 100 men, and those 100 Astartes are given to a rogue trader. When that rogue trader comes across the Ultramarines in the future, the Ultramarines can't be like, thanks for holding them, can we have them back now? Those Space Marines are now part of that rogue trader house. And obviously the rogue trader can release them. There's all sorts of niceties like that, but the Ultramarines can't go give us back our Space Marines because they're no longer considered Ultramarines.
They're also parallel when it comes to power. So they don't I'm not talking. I'm not saying like a regular Space Marine. I'm talking obviously like a chapter master, like you're saying. Yeah, right. A higher ranking Space Marine can't tell a rogue trader what to do, and vice versa. But they can play nice,
pretty much. But a rogue trader could request Space Marines help, and Space Marines often request rogue traders help. In fact, the Carcharodons, for example, use rogue traders to specifically trade shit that they find with the Mechanicum, so they can get resupplied.
Right, because
like,
they
that's
can't
one of the,
talk to the Mechanicum directly very well.
Yeah, so playing nice.
The Carcharodons don't like
They're
coming back and playing with anybody.
Yeah.
The rogue traders are interesting. We could probably spend an episode talking about them, so they'll come up in the future. Operating so far ahead of the Emperor's own advancing Crusade armies, the rogue trader militant expected little to no aid should they come into contact with a force they couldn't handle. Many, after decades of operating in the as of yet unknown or unsecured blackness of the void, became to resemble ramshackle vagabond fleets. Fleets which were made up of starships taken from defeated enemies, even sometimes including ships of Xenos design, novel and esoteric in their nature and form. They were forbidden from returning to Terra, a tactic used by the Emperor to rid himself of powerful rivals while also ensuring that each of their deaths would eventually serve the benefit of mankind. Many vanished, alone and unheard of, to be consumed, destroyed, or enslaved by nameless Xenos forces, the ruinous powers, or any other abomination that thrived in the inky blackness far from the light of Terra. However, just as many of these rogue trader militant members became the foundation of existing rogue trader dynasties, which still serve a vital purpose and are still in operation even in the 42nd millennia. The Imperium expanded in the wake of the leading edge of the Great Crusade, and so did its fleets. As each far-flung kernel of humanity was brought back into the fold, countless long-lost wonders of technology were recovered, or wrestled from the cold, dead hands of those who had refused to give them up. Some of these recovered vessels were unique and constructed through methods that even the most accomplished of Martian tech priests couldn't hope to replicate. The Terminus Est, the Nicor, the Narabilis, and the Phalanx being some of the foremost examples of this. However, many other patterns and classes proved possible to reproduce and replicate, and it wasn't long before the various armies of the Imperial military had begun to require their own distinctive flavor of warships. The ships of the Space Marine legions often featured blunt prows and heavy slab-like armor, built to endure the withering storm of weapons and the fire that accompanied planetary invasion. Their plasma furnaces like hearts, which powered some of the most destructive weapons known to mankind. For all of these similarities, on the outside, the basic pattern of each fleet flavored the nature of their legion, be it the sleek black marauders of the Raven Guard, or the Beret, Crimson, and Gold battle cruisers of the Battle Angels, to the brutishly functional, unadorned steel of the Iron Warriors' siege barks. While the ships of the wider Armada Imperialis, the name used by the Emperor's naval armadas, were more diverse in their design and function. They were built for battle in the void, ranging from kilometer-long engines of destruction that were stately battleships, with their reinforced armor prows and flanks bristling with rank upon rank of broadside batteries, to the lithe and agile destroyers and the stripped-down, bare-bone warp runners, or the watchful frigates and even the lumbering star fortresses. Not to mention the uncountable class of transports, arcs, mass conveyors, supply ships, and the warships and forge vessels of the Mechanicum. One of the interesting things about battleships is the reason they have an armored prow is because sometimes you just fucking crash your ship into a bitch.
Yeah.
T-bone.
Sounds about right.
Fucking run right in.
Call up a hammerhead. What does he say? A hammerhead Corvette.
Oh yeah, and the Star Wars. Apparently, every time we mention Star Wars lore, we don't get deep enough into it, and Patrick just screams at his podcast device. He's probably screaming at his phone right now. He's probably like, "Chuck, I can't believe no."
Sorry, bro. So a lot of. I mean, you might talk about this in the next thing, but so basically, a lot of the fleet is conquered, reconditioned ships until they start to catch up with in your research, did it tell you like how long it would take to like say make a frigate compared to a battleship, and how long it took to get them?
There's no dates given or no timelines given, but it's kind of implied that since there's so many ship foundries just in the Sol system alone, that they're probably working on them at the same, concurrently. Based on how long it took Sol system to fall into compliance, which wasn't very long at all, I imagine that it didn't take that long. And it was probably one of those things where, to bring up the Polites of Saturn again, they come across them and they're like, oh, these ships are really fucking useful. We can copy this pattern really well. All right, we want another 10, we want another 10 of these. And they send that message back to Mars, and Mars starts production. And by the time, maybe 2 years of a campaign have gone by and that fleet is getting ready to leave that area, these reinforcement ships show up, and then they take that expeditionary fleet and they split it into 2 expeditionary fleets, and they go in 2 different directions.
The thing that kind of gets me is like the ships, like the size of the phalanx and stuff.
Yeah.
Is like the amount of material that goes into something like that is astronomical, right? Like, it's ridiculous.
That's like an entire moon's worth of minerals.
Exactly, yeah.
And when they came across those ships, the Terminus Est being another one of them, they were so big and they were so massive, and their design was so specific that the Mechanicum was like, we're not even going to try. We can't reproduce this. And maybe that was we don't have the technology, and maybe that was what you just said. We don't have 2 moons we can sacrifice to making this ship.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that was probably more along the lines. It's like, that's a lot of resources, one ship compared to,
Well, and then where are you going to build it?
I mean, flanks is huge.
Right.
Yeah, where are you going to build something like the Phalanx? You build it on the moon that you're gutting. Like,
yeah.
So it'd be like, because they describe Phalanx as having Space Marine battle barges hanging in it.
It can birth, I think, 10 battle barges along its like front.
On the side.
So you can have 10 of them side by side on one of its wings.
Nuts.
So it's massive. So it's like, would you rather build 100 battle barges or one ship?
Well, and
it depends
they have
on
shipyards to build battle barges. They don't have shipyards to build phalanxes.
Well, and they also already have star fortresses. So do you really need to build another star fortress, or do you just
that too?
Yeah, like the amount of time, material, all of that, like years and years and years of work. Like, it takes 10 years sometimes to build a large building on Earth.
Oh, think of it in ship terms.
Right.
Navy ships took years to build Navy ships.
Yeah, like, do we know how long it would take to build like an aircraft carrier?
I'm sure there's a build time stat somewhere. Let me double check.
But like, just the amount of time it would take to build something that large on a planet versus building something, 1,000 times that size in a space.
And a modern aircraft carrier would be the size of what, like a small frigate destroyer.
Gerald R. Ford class carrier can be built in 3 to 4 years. Keep in mind, we have those. I've done some research on shipbuilding before. They're modular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
that's probably how spaceships. I was going to bring that up. That's probably how spaceships are built too.
That we can build them that fast is because they're modular. The tower has the same computers in it that every other ship has in it. All this stuff is the same. It's Navy standard. They can just crank out a mass production of it. It's basically
it's
an
a
STC
war.
of it.
Yeah.
It's a war weapon, so you can build. Usually would build those a lot faster than you would build something like a civilian, building.
Yeah.
Well, in a lot of cases, a couple of different things were happening with the Great Crusade ships, and the first one is exactly the way that you guys are talking about right now. The Mechanicum already had the ability to build the modular. So say like a full battle barge, not a battle barge, say a full battleship takes 6 different sections to put together. The Mechanicum has manufactorums that can build a section in a year, and they've got 20 manufactorums. So they can make more than one ship at a time, essentially. And then the space docks, the Ring of Iron is described as having like 100. It's one of the largest shipyards in the Imperium, and it's got hundreds and probably thousands of berths. And so they could build one in each, so that even if it took you 2 to 3 years to assemble one in entirety, if you can do 1,000 of them at the same time, you're not
building two
having,
or three in a year. You're building 1,000 in 3 years, which is 1,000 a year.
Yeah, kind of like StarCraft, right? Like you build, 10 barracks, and then you
build Marines
all
with
10
all of them. Yeah.
Right.
And then your opponent is like, why are there 200 Marines running?
Already. Yeah.
Oh man,
But,
when I first learned about that, like going from being like an 8-year-old playing and being like, I'm going to build one of each building and that's all I need. Then going into like,
StarCraft
I can build lots of things.
Yeah. StarCraft is all about manipulating your economy versus production. And you do that with just overloading everything. But the other thing to keep in mind is if there was a pattern of bulk conveyor that was already being used for trade and it was close enough to a battleship, they would just strap guns on it, put extra armor on it, and call it a battleship. And that refit might take 6 months.
Yep.
And that refit could happen, you roll into a system of 5 planets and the Space Marines are going to have to go down. And in general, the reason that they didn't roll in and completely just destroy everything from orbit was because they were trying to reunite humanity. So the Space Marines are going to be invested in a combat that's going to be, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever per planet. So in the time that it's taking them to subjugate every planet, Planet 1, which fell, the Mechanicum is going through all of their ships and refitting and retrofitting whatever they need to, as well as retrofitting their manufactorums and getting their manufactorums to make the pattern that they want. So they're making the ships as they're conquering the new territory. It's an exponential growth curve. It's very slow at the beginning, and then it's ridiculously fast, essentially.
Especially when they conquer like real Forge worlds and stuff like that.
Right. And again, those 6 Forge worlds that I mentioned got to a point during the Great Crusade where they rivaled the production of the Mechanicum on Mars. The reason that's impressive is because Mars is supposedly the best, most productive Forge world. So at least at that time, there's a physics and engineering problem there where there's a finite amount of resources in the Sol system. So I don't really know how you find a brand new virgin system that only has a planet in it. And like the people are technologically advanced, but have only been there for 5,000 years and haven't actually really left the planet. How does that system not have more resources than Sol? But whatever.
Well, we got a lot of rust. Let's see what we can do with that.
What can we do with a lot of rust? Well, and the other thing that we don't talk about it, and we worked it into the way that the economy of Innsmouth and Arconia works, but we don't necessarily think about it or talk about it a lot actively in Warhammer 40k, is the Mechanicum is constantly going out and fucking mining asteroids and pulling shit in from the Oort cloud and bringing it back to Mars and breaking shit down. It's not just what can be mined on Earth and Mars. It's what can be mined everywhere.
In the asteroid belts.
It's everywhere.
The rediscovery of the Primarchs. Despite the access to a vast and growing fleet of starships and all the military materials the Forge of Mars could churn out, the early expansion from Terra was slow. This resulted primarily from the lack of necessary manpower and the skilled leadership it required to utilize that manpower. Without the direct access to the Primarch's unique genomes, the time it required to create a new Space Marine proved to be longer than ideal. This process was further slowed by the Emperor's adamancy that he controlled all genetic material needed for new Astartes gene seed, an effort made to keep the gene seed organs 100% stable, pure, and effective, as even at this stage, mutation had a habit of setting in. It was only a short time after the launch of the Great Crusade that the Principa Imperialis reached the mining world of Chthoniya during one of its first warp jumps. This was the adoptive homeworld of Horus Lubrical, and he was the first of the Emperor's sons to be reunited with the father. The two would go on to forge a truly unique bond, one of respect, friendship, and even a trace of paternal love, the two acting to save one another's lives on many occasions. Horus was given over command of the 16th Legion of Space Marines, the Luna Wolves, and he soon set the precedent for raising all future Astartes for his legion from the men of his homeworld. With the increased production of new space marines of Chthonian stock made possible by direct access to their Primarch's genome, the Great Crusade began to build steam in earnest. As soon as he found Horus, let's say, and they don't really give, they do kind of give dates. He could raise space marines on Terra in a decade, and he could raise thousands of them at a time. But as the Great Crusade kind of moved on, the fact that you can raise 10,000 in a decade means little when you have 40 worlds that you need to conquer, and each world needs 1,000. Okay, well, now your resources are kind of getting spread thin. When he finds Horus, the amount of time required to make a space marine from Chthonian stock drops to like 2 to 3 years, because he has access to Horus and he has access to Horus's genome. So he can stabilize the gene seed, and he can rely on the gene seed to act more on the way it's supposed to. So the time goes from, I have to nurture it for 10 years, which is way faster than it took me to make, a Primarch, but still, to, okay, well, now I've stabilized everything. We can induct all of these 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. They can have all their surgeries. They can go through all their aspirant training. Okay, now they're 14, 15, and they're ready to go onto the field of battle. So it increased by that magnitude, which allowed them basically to like do the next step.
Right. Not to mention all the rampant mutation on Terra, right? That's why it took him so long, like the 10 years of him trying to basically stabilize the mutation.
Yeah, humanity wasn't in a great place.
A good stock, yeah.
And part of making the Primarchs, and part of the reason it took 200, 300 years to make the Primarchs, was because he had to go through all of that refinement process to make their genome stable. But as soon as they got scattered, he lost access to their genome. So
yep, slowed it all down.
Another thing to take out of this chunk that's important is Horus was probably the only son that the Emperor actually considered to be a child. Like, they had that father-son relationship. And a lot of that is because the two of them were fighting on the front lines of the Great Crusade together for years before any other Primarch was found. They had all of this time to like bond with one another and learn from one another. So Horus probably was the most studied in the way the Emperor wanted shit run. Horus was the best choice for a lot of reasons. He was obviously also the best choice for a lot of wrong reasons, but
yeah,
as we'll find out later. Spoiler alert. It does not all end well. They don't name a heresy after you when you're good, okay?
That's true.
When I got an A in advanced biology, they didn't name a heresy after me. They gave me a plaque.
For $3 or $9, you can look at that good-looking Primarch on the screen.
You can look at it. You can look at this stone-faced motherfucker in his gold armor.
So awesome.
Not all the worlds brought into the imperial compliance were the consequence of conflict, some being brought to the table through negotiation and diplomacy. The Imperium of man often only settling on conquest when other methods had been all but exhausted. While the Emperor loathed war, he understood that at times conquest was the fastest way to unify humanity quickly. For if mankind was to survive the hostile and rigorous trials of the universe, it would need to stand as a united front. Every world brought into the fold was introduced to the imperial truth, the emperor's chosen philosophy and the foundation of imperial culture. This truth was exceptionally atheistic and rejected all forms of human religion and spirituality, striving to replace superstition with rationalism and scientific progress. It would be another 30 years of the Crusade expansion before the emperor discovered the next of his Primarchs, the Wolf King of the frozen world of Fenris, Leman Russ. While Horus was pleased at the discovery of one of his long-lost brothers, he was secretly envious of his position as the Emperor's favorite, a title he sought to keep regardless of how many Primarchs would go on to be rediscovered. Much like Horus had been given command of the Luna Wolves, Leman Russ was given command of the 6th Legion Space Wolves, and he continued the tradition of pulling new Astartes from his adoptive homeworld of Fenris. Once again, production increased, with 2 Legions Primarchs' genomes now recovered. The Crusade's ability to expand only increased. So now now the Emperor can't just only make Luna Wolves. Now he can make Luna Wolves and Space Wolves. So if you can produce 1,000 Luna Wolves at a time, you just doubled your production. Now you can make 1,000 Luna Wolves and 1,000 Space Wolves.
Yep.
So very similar to how the Tau ran, except with the exception of religion, right? Because Tau don't give a shit who you believe in as long as you're a part of their cause. Emperor gives a shit about what you believe in, and you have to be a part of his cause.
And a lot of that is because most religions and most superstitions, especially the ones that he was encountering or that we encountered, I guess, as we spread to the galaxy, were fueled either by the Xenos or by the Ruinous powers. And the Tau don't care because they can't see them.
And if they can't see it, it doesn't exist.
The Tau have a spiritual condom, if you will.
That's a good way to put it.
Come on, Marky, that was for you.
This is pretty good. This is pretty good. I give you props.
I channeled my inner Marky for that one.
Yeah, don't do that, or else there's no reason for me to be here. All right.
What's this stuff that they get out in like crime scene investigation shows when they like get
Semen?
the light out? Yes. No, the thing that detects the semen. They turn on the black light.
The black light?
Yeah, black light.
Yeah. The Emperor is showing up and turning on the black light and going, "Oh, this bedroom looks like a Jackson Pollock." And the Tower's showing up and going, "We don't believe in black lights."
What's this air you talk about? I don't see it.
I don't see it. It must not exist. As we covered in part 2 of our series on the Emperor and his Primarchs, eventually all of the Primarchs were rediscovered by the various expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade. Each was given control of their legion and in turn continued the tradition established by Horus of recruiting new Astartes from their adoptive homeworlds. We cover the order in which they were discovered in part 2 of that series, but it's important to note that Alfarius and Omegon of the Alpha Legion were discovered last, and not much, if anything, is known of their homeworld, and what is known has been specifically hidden from the Imperium. As the solar decades moved on, each new world won in negotiations or conquest swelled the ranks of the Imperium and the resource stocks it had access to, fueling the ever-growing need for new starships and the massive amount of material that were needed to just keep the machine of conquest moving. With all the Primarchs rediscovered, the time to produce a new Astartes dramatically decreased, and a new Astartes warrior became ready for combat in as little as a standard year at the height of the Crusade. This rapid creation started to prove disastrous, however, as mental defects and unique and eccentric oddities of behavior began to creep into the ranks of Astartes. The demand of the Great Crusade pushing the needs for new soldiers dangerously past a point where corners were being cut. Vetting and trading times were reduced, be they for the aspirants of the Space Marine program or just for those soldiers that were becoming members of the Imperial Army. However, by the 31st millennium, roughly 200 standard Terran years after it began, the Great Crusade had reunited massive chunks of the galaxy under the leadership of the Emperor of Mankind, and the implied promise of a new golden age of progress and reason seemed all but assured. So one of the things important to note as an aside to this is the reason that the rapid creation was happening was the Primarchs were making the calls to make new soldiers. And a lot of times they were thinking like generals. I lost 100, I need 100 more, and I need them before I reach the next battlefield. And because that was happening, because the Emperor was back on Terra, no longer overseeing it, no one is really watching the gene seed process. You know, the gene seed process is now being handled by Astartes, apothecaries. Primarchs are giving orders to the apothecaries are making the new warriors.
More men.
So it was like an arms race between all the Primarchs, essentially, right?
Essentially.
I need more.
Right.
Gotcha.
And that's a lot of what led to, you know, the Curse of the Wolfen, the Canis Helix, the Black Rage. There, I can't remember all of it. There's several others we'll talk about as we get into the legions.
I think it's the Red Thirst, not Black Rage.
Red Thirst, thank you.
There's the whole thing too in the novels with the Dark Angels. I don't know if they became the best at creating really quick, but it talks about how fast they were being replenished at a time. Like it was thousands at a time for the Dark Angels. It was like
that was during the Ragdan, if I remember right.
It was like, oh, here's another 3,000, and Johnson's like, like, what the hell? How do I could just get 3,000 more troops? Sit them out, like Ryan's just talking all these new ships. Okay, you're a Crusade fleet, you're a Crusade fleet, you're a Crusade fleet, go.
Everyone's a Crusade.
Yeah. It's neat with that one, too, because when, I don't know if you're going to touch on it, but as the Crusade went, when you read the novels, you have your Terran-born that have been fighting for 200 years.
And you have your naturalists.
And you have the ones from like Caliban, and it's like there's 200 years apart, 200 years of fighting, where the Space Marines were actually starting to slow down, wanting the bloodshed, like the quick, we got to hurry up, we got to conquer the planet. They're starting to slow down, but yet a lot of the newbies are coming in. It's their first time in the Crusade, and like, nah, fuck diplomacy. We're going in. Yeah.
The only way that I really touch on it is by mentioning the fact that as the Primarchs were found, so before the Primarchs' homeworlds were discovered, before the genomes were stabilized, and before the Primarchs started making the decision to adopt new Astartes warriors, all Astartes were coming from Earth. It was Horus saying, okay, great, Luna Wolves come from Chthonian now, that set up that precedent, which every single Primarch followed.
Yeah.
And it probably, honestly, for good reason. One, this is the culture they grew up in. These are the people they knew. But in the case of, here's the thing. So Horus is the first found, and Horus is probably, honestly, the most charismatic. He's described as the most charismatic. He's the most well-liked by everybody. He's the most even-spoken. He's a brilliant tactician, and he has this deep connection with the Emperor. Lehman is the second one found. Lehman is arguably the biggest fucking nihilist of all of the Primarchs. He does not give a fuck about who you are or what you want him to do. Nihilist isn't the right word. Rebellious. He doesn't give a fuck about who you are or what you want him to do. So what probably honestly happened is he probably wasn't like, this is a great tradition, I'm going to honor it. He was probably like, I don't fucking care. If that's what Horus said, sure, whatever. This is beneath me. I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
But then when you get to the third guy out, you get to the third guy out, Johnson's like, well, the last two guys are doing it. I guess that's what we're supposed to do. And then the fourth guy is like, okay, well, three are doing it. I should do it. Like, it just becomes, it becomes harder to argue against it as it goes on. But as Chuck is saying, it built in resentment between the Terran-born Space Marines and the Space Marines that were born on their planets. And a lot of the Terran-born Space Marines, even though they were more accomplished, more level-headed, more tactical, and better warriors, got treated like shit because they weren't from the homeworld.
That's a big thing. I know got driven home in a lot of the novels I've read. It's like, this guy is way better at everything that he's doing. I should listen to him, but I'm a brand new captain and I need the glory for all my guys that just showed up.
Yeah.
Eager to prove themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and at the same time, like Loken, as an example, being one of the more famous examples that we have, we can just pull from, Loken had kind of tired of war in a lot of ways. He understood why it had to happen, but he was kind of like done with the bloodshed part of it, at least. Like it was his job. He was going to continue fighting when he was sent somewhere.
An old man in a young man's profession.
Right. Loken would look at a situation and go, have we tried talking to them? And Abaddon would be like, fuck that. I can teleport into the dude's throne room and decapitate him. And the war's over. Abaddon was always ready to go to violence immediately. Yeah, we don't have to. I don't want to. I don't want to. Older brother. I don't. Nah. It's one of my favorite characters, and I'm making fun of him. It's fine.
I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. That's not what we're here for. They go down to the planet, and they're talking, and of course, it's like the UN and all the different nations, like some are for it, some are against it. The younger captain hits his teleport Homer. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, Terminators come in, drop pods start land. Like the way to describe it's great. Terminators come in, lay waste to the whole chamber. Drop pods start landing everywhere from his ships. And the other captain's like, are you serious? He's like, we're doing what the lion wants. We're conquering. He's like, that's like kind of where it ends. I was like, wow, that's so...
Well, in that first Horus Heresy novel that really focuses around the
Was there when when Horus killed the Emperor.
The one that starts with that line. It focuses on like a battle that the Luna Wolves are fighting against some unnamed emperor. Basically, the Luna Wolves are expanding out, and go, welcome, brothers. And the planet's like, welcome, other humans. We've been looking for you. And they're like, we've been looking for you too. And they start the diplomacy roll. And they're about halfway through the diplomacy roll. And the emperor of this new group goes, no, I'm the emperor of humanity. You guys are not. Your boss is not.
Oh yeah.
This is Earth. You don't come from Earth. This is Earth. For whatever reason, that's just what they believe. And that sets up this weird thing where the emperor runs to his palace. And as he's running to his palace to call all of his forces to start, Abaddon and the first legion, or the first chapter, first company. Thank you. First company Justicarians just warp into his throne room and fucking murder him. And the entire war ends immediately.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Emperor and all of his guards are just immediately killed by Abaddon and the Justicari, and the entire planet goes, oh, I guess you're from real Earth. Our God Emperor would not have died if he was actually a God Emperor.
Clearly, he wasn't
wrong.
God Emperor enough.
Yeah. It's just interesting how so many times it's just warp into the throne room and fucking massacre a bunch of people works.
Sometimes that's just all it takes. And I think that's where the it only takes 10 Space Marines to take a world comes from. If you can do that, if you can teleport in and just kill all their leaders and then the world capitulates, you can do it with 10 Marines.
Chuck, do you remember? I think it's the third book. I think it's the Sons of Horus and the World Eaters and humans. And they're on a planet like Imperial Guardsmen. They're on a planet where the other side doesn't have Space Marines, but they have something that's between a human and a Space Marine. And they're legitimately losing. The Imperium is legitimately losing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I
remember hearing about this. This is where they're firing black hole missiles at each other and shit, right?
Yeah, I think it gets to the point where they're literally firing world-ending shit at each other.
Yeah, I kind of remember that one. I know the planet that they end up on when Erebus gets the Enanthium from their museum.
What are they called? The Atrixians? Yeah,
those dudes are basically a lean Space Marine. Yeah. I just remember how they're described as they're Space Marines, but they're not thick.
They're like an Eldari version of a Space Marine.
Yeah, where they're keeping up with them.
Scary.
Oh yeah. That novel's pretty cool. That one's pretty cool.
That's the same novel where they fight the
bugs.
The mecha arachnids, because it's those people that made the mecha arachnid planet.
Oh,
yeah, and put the warning, stay away.
Yeah.
They're we don't fucked up here.
That's the whole thing. That the fucking Sons of Horus and the Emperor's children and the Blood Angels show up to this planet. Blood Angels. Yeah, they show up to this planet that's just fucking covered in these mecha arachnids, and they're we must destroy and subjugate you. And they're having this endless war because there's way more of those than anything else. And then the Atrixians or whatever they're called show up and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? We quarantined them to this planet
for a reason.
And we put signs up saying don't land here. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, they were the ones too, right, that had the legend to be wary of. So it went along the lines of something be wary of those that are like you and say they come to unite you, and they come in a guise of peace, but they're only there for war.
Yeah.
And essentially are Space Marines.
Their language is based on emotion and music.
Yeah.
They're a relatively cool species.
It was a cool thing. And the whole end scene, I love how they describe it. In my mind, it's just Horus standing there in robes, fire around him, and all he has is a fucking dinner knife that he just sliced everybody up with to get out of this burning building.
And he feels like shit. He legitimately did not want to kill any of these people.
He didn't want to do it. He really, I mean, that whole novel is another one of those.
Yeah.
Fuck. Yeah.
There are some good Horus Heresy novels. They get really samey, but there are some good ones.
Yeah.
All right. So the Enlightenment writ in blood, the Pax Imperialis. The Great Crusade brought peace and unity to mankind, ending wars between peoples, nations, and even among neighboring planets. The people of the Imperium were freed from the shackles of age-old superstition and the chains which bound them to the whims of tyrants or saw them toil under the gaze of murderous Xenos. These were high ideals, but ideals that came with a steep price. And while mankind had been brought into a period of illumination, in some cases it was dragged kicking and screaming into that illumination. Many trying to pull back into the comfortable shadows of the old ways of ignorance and strife. The unification of Terra and the foundation of the Imperium had not only come through words of negotiation and alliance, but through brutal application of the force of arms. This was the basic truth of the Pax Imperialis, and as humanity spread to the stars once again, this truth followed along in the wake of the Crusade. However, it is not always in open warfare that the blood price of the universal peace is paid. The enemies of the Imperium were insidious. Even before Horus turned from the Emperor, there were many who spoke the words of loyalty even while they sowed seeds of treachery within their hearts. The idolized visions of the Great Crusade is legendary heroes and champions of mankind conquering in the name of justice and peace on open and well-defined battlefields. But the truth was that there were many other methods and less noble ways of keeping and establishing peace. The assassin temples, the networks of informers and silent agents who reported only to Malcador the Sigillite, the annihilation protocols, and the ancient and forbidden weapons wielded by a chosen few in the Space Marine legions were all tools by which the Imperium enforced its truth. The Emperor saw the ends justifying the means, all in the pursuit of his grand vision, and for a time this brought peace to the galaxy. He knew that his time would eventually run out, however, and that humanity would need to be unified and ready without him to stand against the coming of the Chaos Gods, for only their power could actually truly stop him. But yeah, they're the Assassinorum we'll get talked about.
I really think too, when you talk about, I think it's really, I don't know if you've read much about that, Marky, but it is
reading. No.
I know reading. I know. I'm sorry, bro. But like the whole thing, like how I again, specific novels I've read is like really amazing. One of them, because somebody, I don't want to do the spoiler yet because I don't know what Ryan's going to say, but a Primarch shows up to put them all in their place. Yeah. Yeah. I really like that novel. It's a pretty good novel.
There's a lot of crazy assassin stuff. There's an assassin, I think it's Calexis, but it might be Calitus. There's two of them that their names are really close to each other that are essentially like roid raged.
Yep.
Fucking.
That's the Eversor.
It's the Eversor, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Eversor is basically just like pumped full of shit constantly, and they're either asleep or they're active, and when they're active, they murder everything. And there are cases where the Imperium realized that releasing one Eversor assassin on a planet would be quicker than going into a war of compliance with the Space Marines, and they would just drop a fucking mass murderer on the planet and let him go through
hundreds of thousands of people. And then they'd be like, hey, we heard you were having problems. We'll send a couple of Space Marines to help. And then, of course, they deactivate the Eversor assassin. They don't even kill him. They just like get close enough to deactivate him. And then the people are like, oh, you've saved us, and join. Like the Emperor did not care. And then, of course, there was the time that, I almost said Korax, Conrad Cruz was killed by an assassin. Well,
allegedly.
I mean,
he let himself get killed.
Yeah, he just sat there and was like, wasn't he just like, well, it's about time you showed up?
His like dying words were something akin to, we'll bring up the quote when we talk about this in like on an episode, but his dying words were something like, there'll be nothing more terrible than the terror I've sowed, that if my terror ends at your hand. And I'm like, nothing will be scarier than if somebody kills you? Like, what the fuck does that even mean? You absolute fucking insane person. But that's just one of the things. Conrad was not well adjusted.
No. He had some issues.
Daddy didn't hug him enough when he was little.
I don't
Nope.
think Daddy hugged him at all. I think Daddy beat that one.
Yeah, probably. The cracks begin to spread. By the very nature of its success, as the Imperium grew, the very edge of the Great Crusade expanded even farther from any sort of centralized communication network. Even the expeditionary fleets began to fracture and separate further from one another, some for solar decades at a time. The Night Lords and the World Eaters became infamous for their ever greater atrocities that they committed during the conquest of new worlds, while the Thousand Sons' pursuit of knowledge transformed into the use of sorcery, through which the secret whisperings of Tzeentch could be heard. And the word-bearer's fanaticism slowly revealed itself to be a religious belief in the Emperor's own divinity, regardless of how much the Emperor rejected their attempts at worship, as it violated the atheistic standpoint of the imperial truth. Meanwhile, the Imperial Army, which was composed of mostly human soldiers by this time, some regiments like the Geno 25 Gilead were still the product of selective breeding and genetic manipulations. However, these troops provided the much-needed garrison and support duties created by the Astartes advance. With each planet, these demands split them more and more from any centralized communication on their own. The Astartes could then jump to the next world, repeating the cycle which led to a fierce loyalty across both Space Marine legionaries and the Imperial Army soldiers, who began to speak in terms of their loyalty to the Primarchs they served under, not their Emperor. While the Emperor was seen among the soldiers for a time before the Olinar Crusade, after it, when he returned to Terra, this gulf would just deepen quicker. A sense of we are the soldiers of the Imperium, not its actual citizens, grew, as the soldiers of the Crusade saw themselves as removed from the government they established, secured and in theory represented. No longer in the field, as he was now consumed with his great secret webway project, these growing fractures went essentially completely unnoticed by the Emperor.
Also worth noting, the Space Marines and the Primarchs didn't really fully know what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was just like, y'all take this crusade thing and keep doing it. I'm going to go home.
Horus, Dorn, Russ, and somebody else knew that he was working on a project that would replace the requirement of warp travel. The Khan. I think the Khan.
Oh, okay.
Maybe the Khan.
But
Well,
yeah, the majority of the Primarchs just knew that he went back home. And they were like, what the fuck? Why did you leave us out here to clean up your mess?
Well,
essentially.
In the novels too, like when they describe when he first goes back, it's more essentially to establish the foothold, the structure, the ministorum, like you've talked about. It's like, hey, now we're way out here. Let's set the structure of everything to follow behind.
Right.
And like Ryan's been talking about, a lot of people took resentment for that. It's like, wait, huh? He just been on the front line for 200 years. Now he's setting the structure behind. Like, yeah.
And there were other cracks and fractures that had already been made. Like we had mentioned, there are members
Primarchs that don't get along.
Yeah. And there are members of the Terran-born Astartes who are probably Thunder Warriors. We know of at least two. One World Eater, I can't remember his name. One World Eater who is most likely a Thunder Warrior. Plus, one of the early battles of the unification, or one of the early battles of the Great Crusade, was fought against Thunder Warriors who escaped Earth and had fled to a different planet. Yeah. So the Space Marines, the Astartes, knew, especially the Terran-born Astartes, knew what had happened to the Thunder Warriors. There were talks within the Space Marine legions of, when the Great Crusade is over, what's going to happen to us? Are we next on the chopping block? And the same thing kind of happened with some of the Primarchs, especially the more paranoid ones like Perturabo. The same sort of like questioning was happening as they kind of withdrew more and more into themselves and only relied on their legion. The contingency plan was, when the shit hits the fan, I'm just taking my legion, going back to my homeworld and not allowing the Imperium to like mess with me.
And with a trip, I forget which novel it is. Oh, I think it's when what's the Raven Guard Primarch?
Corvus Corax.
Corax. I think it's when Corax goes to Terra. He gets to enter some huge chamber that is basically established and empty. It's empty, but it's set up in a way for every legion to have its own place on Terra.
Yeah, and the villas. There was
and and everything's set up in a way of like their home worlds, things that are familiar to them. So like what a lot of them didn't realize, the Emperor had an end game. They were going to be the peacekeepers forever, but he had like a place on Terra for everyone.
Yeah, and each Primarch had like a mansion to fulfill them.
Yeah, that's a thing. That's a really cool novel too, because I really wish I didn't stop reading these novels, because some of them are really well written, and you get to, you know, in the whole sci-fi realm, see how powerful some of them are, and like the actual intents that were driven. Because I think in that one, Conrad Cruz and Dorn are having an argument in the royal palace, and they hear the Emperor through their heads basically to shut up and Dorn, do this, give this to him, and just go back to what you're doing. And it's like, whoa, like you don't even know where the Emperor is in the Himalayas, and he's doing that.
And that was the other thing, you know, the Emperor, up until the point he went back to Terra, because that's kind of when the major fission between him and Horus's relationship happens. But before he had gone back to that, you know, he would command the other Primarchs to do stuff. He would talk to Horus as if Horus was an equal. So there were all of these different, like, none of the heresy was not Horus is an asshole and decided to fuck up everything. The heresy was a massive, like, conglomerate of all of these different things. Yeah. Horus is just the linchpin. And Horus is just the one who got killed and reanimated by, you know,
chaos.
Resurrected essentially by chaos. Yeah. That allowed him to become the figurehead that they needed. And the majority of the reason that they chose him was because he was charismatic. Horus could stand in front of 100,000 troops and change their opinion, you know, Imperial soldiers, and change their opinion from loyal to traitor.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it is interesting. A lot of stuff in the books.
That's where we will pick back up with next episode, going more in depth with a look at the Olenor Crusade, the naming of Horus as War Master of the Imperium, and the events of the waning years of the Great Crusade. You guys want to get in contact with us about the show, or ask us questions about a bit of lore that you feel we missed, or maybe share your own short stories, homebrew lore, and spooky dookies? You can do that by reaching out to us by email at underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com or jimdarkgaming@gmail.com.
You can also reach us through our community on Discord. There we chat about 40k lore, hobby, tactics, Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy Battle, creative writing, video games, role-playing, and so much more. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or at www.underthehiveofmadness.com. Give us a like and review wherever you get your podcast fix. Our home is on Spotify, but you can also find us on Apple, Google, Stitcher, and many more.
Support us through Patreon at www.patreon.com/underthehiveofmadness. Patreon members get access to video podcasts with minimal editing, so you can see our beautiful faces, follow along with what we are looking at on our screen, and hear our bloopers, which are just amazing. It's not me stumbling over basic words. They're
it's us making fun of him for
gold. It. Yes, true. All Patreon levels also get access to our quarterly painting, like that right there, quarterly. All Patreon levels also get access to our quarterly painting contests. Plus, we have perks at higher levels, so we all encourage you to head on over and check those out. Frank is running his Season of the Four-Armed Rat specials all month long. Buy 5 rounds and get the 6th one free. That goes for ice rot, tequila, or bullets. Be sure to check out his deals on used hand cannons, perfect for any of your anti-rat needs. After all, the chimney meat's gotta come from somewhere. Proving we'll never stop being a continuous needle in the administratum's side, we are the last bastion of truth. 665.66 UHMA Chemrat Radio. Reminding all of you chemrats, hive mice, and some ghoulies to keep those dials fixed. Right here, same ratty frequency for a dose of the same ratty-ass attitude. Four-armed emperors stalk and hide. Four-armed emperors know how to get inside. Down the ducks. Up the loo, four-armed emperors know just what to do. Four-armed emperors sneak and spy. Four-armed emperors hear the babies cry. Find the crib and climb beneath. Scrape the claws and lick their teeth.
Whoa. Nice cock.
How does that fit?
I don't know.